What's up, investors? Thank you for watching the Chain Trends Crypto Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Brandon Quinttem. Brandon, thank you so much for joining. Could we just start a little bit? We're going to get into mining and stuff a little later, but I want to just talk about your background a little bit and how you got into crypto.
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. We were talking pre-show here about how this started, and like most things in this industry, they start with a Twitter conversation. Some sparks go off, some DMs fly around, and here we are. So appreciate you reaching out. Looking forward to it. My story, I started my career at Oracle selling enterprise software in 2010 upon graduating college. Heard about Bitcoin maybe 11 or 12 as it relates to the Silk Road. Essentially, friends were like, hey, you can buy drugs on the internet. And I was like, how is that possible? Magic internet money. I remember asking some specific questions. It got to mining, actually. And I was like, that makes no sense. That's stupid, but whatever. Forgot about it. So like most people, never thought about it as an investment, just bumped into it. Bumped into it a few more times along the way, again, like most people. And then in 2017, I was watching the price go up again. Third time's a charm. Okay, I got to get in on this action. And so the number go up technology of Bitcoin's price is what lured me in. Then I went through a standard 3-month drop everything rabbit hole, study 15 hours a day, go to sleep with Andreas in your ears. Truly a religious experience in all technical sense of the terms. And then I sort of realized, okay, I need to reorient my life. At that time, my girlfriend at the time, now wife, were nomadic and kind of like got disenchanted with the whole corporate America side of life and decided we're going to just abandon that, read 4-hour work week and started traveling and working remotely. And we spent about 5 years building online businesses during that period of time. And as soon as I bumped into Bitcoin, it's like, okay, we're selling all our online businesses. This is where I'm going to work. I spent all of 18 and 19 essentially just transitioning, right? Making sure I know everything I need to know and networking and doing all kinds of jobs from consulting to writing to business development roles, marketing roles, etc. And then I landed at Swan Bitcoin, where I work now, at the end of 2019. And I met the CEO, Corey Clipson, at a Bitcoin conference. We hit it off, skills match, align, startup. Okay, let's do this kind of thing. And then I've been with there, coming up on 2 years. We went from 5 employees or so when I joined to about 40 now, growing fast. And we're just a Bitcoin only on-ramp or exchange, you could say. And yeah, we're kind of known for our DCA products and being very easy to use. So people create an account and they say, hey, I want to buy $50 worth of Bitcoin a week or a day or a month or whatever. Connect your bank, hit go, and everything's automated. And that's kind of our philosophy, is just DCA. This thing's volatile, this thing's crazy. And if we're right, a little bit each week goes a long way. And so that's kind of what we preach at Swan. And we're all about community and education. That's kind of like our ethos, our brand, how we acquire customers. And so we hire all the writers and the speakers and people like that who do business functions at Swan, but they also are very active in the community.
Right. And by DCA, you mean dollar cost average. And that's something that I say all the time. Dollar cost averaging with Bitcoin is the best strategy for me. And that's basically what I beat home with my audience. And time in the market, not timing the market, right? Like, so Swan Bitcoin is now just to get clarity. So Swan Bitcoin is a place I can basically, it's almost like a direct deposit that I could basically get X amount of dollars every week transferred, or paid in Bitcoin. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so I'll explain a little more. We have a bunch of different products. When I was mentioning the dollar cost average plan, that's kind of what we were most known for. We were the first people to build that in and make it popular in early 2020. But really what you can do is you can fund your Bitcoin, your Swan account with any way. You can send a wire, you can do an ACH, you can do a direct deposit, whatever you want. And then you can either make one-time smash buys, or you can set up these automated plans. Okay. Right. And we always encourage the automated plans, but not everyone does that.
Right.
And so, yeah, you can also get paid your Bitcoin, your paycheck to your Swan account if you want to do that. We have a whale business, which we call Swan Private. So let's say you want like hand holding, you want one-on-one support. You want to talk to Stefan Livera one-on-one to figure out your tax strategy or whatever. That's all part of that side of the business. We have kind of the retail and the whale side of the business. Both are great. And then we also have Swan Advisor Services, which is kind of our new product, which will be helping financial advisors get Bitcoin access for their clients. And
wow, that's big. Yeah, I like that.
there's so much money. There's so much money hiding behind financial advisors. And so
Right.
kind of educate them, give them tools. And we anticipate a wall of money coming from there over the next 5 years or so.
Yes, and this is and this topic is the topic of Bitcoin. Let me say it's so robust. It's so nuanced, right? It's incredibly nuanced in so many different areas. One area that I think people really should understand and learn is like how these transactions are verified, how blocks are minted, what miners are, and how the whole mining industry is evolving. So that's why it's a pleasure to have you on. And again, thank you for doing this. So in a nutshell or briefly, how would you describe to somebody how transactions are verified and what happens in the Bitcoin mining process?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So first, I would frame Bitcoin's mining, proof of work, the energy use, that whole layer of Bitcoin is by far the hardest to understand aspect of Bitcoin. It's not intuitive and it's very, very easy, I should say, to read about it a little bit. You think you understand it, and then you make these snap judgments that are actually not true. And so all kinds of people in the industry, they sort of attack proof of work and Bitcoin mining, all this stuff, because they think it's bad for various reasons, use too much energy or whatever. And I understand how they came to that conclusion, right? If you spend an hour on it, it sounds crazy. It sounds totally wacky and wrong. And, the proof of stake people will say, well, we can get everything that proof of work does. We can just replace that with proof of stake and there's no problems, right? We can get into the trade-offs because the answer is that nothing can replace proof of work. You can use proof of stake for other things, but not for what Bitcoin provides. So let's get into kind of the 101. There's three main stakeholders in the Bitcoin system. Okay, there are users. So that's you and I. We own some Bitcoin, and we communicate online. We share our opinions and like the social layer of Bitcoin. Okay, and then there are node runners. Right. So I run a node and the node has certain responsibilities in the network. There's also miners. They have other unique responsibilities in the network. And it's kind of a tug of war between those three different groups and how they interact with the network. And we're sort of all on the same team because we're incentivized to keep the protocol going and moving in the right direction. However, we all have slightly different roles and responsibilities and different strengths. And so you can think of the miners as sort of like a utility member. They're just service members that the Bitcoin protocol pays to do the work. And their job is to order transactions. At a high level, you can think like security and accounting, but it's much more sophisticated than that. But it's probably not useful to go too deep there. The nodes, what they do is they relay transactions. So I get a transaction to my node. My node says, hey, is this transaction valid? Does it follow the consensus rules that we agreed to? If yes, right, then I'm gonna pass that transaction to the next person, and it will just fly around the network. However, if the transaction is invalid, so someone's trying to cheat or they're trying to do something on accident that's not correct, the node would just say no to that. And so that protects us if the miners try to cheat. Let's say they try to pay themselves 1 million Bitcoins, right? That after they mine that block, after they say, yep, here's a valid transaction, they're going to ship it around the network, but my node will see that block and say, nope, this is cheating. It doesn't work. And so in a sense, they keep each other honest. And what blocks are, right? So every 10 minutes on average, the Bitcoin network updates itself. That's a new entry into the ledger. And at that point, the miners essentially take all the recent transactions, they put them in a block, and they say, okay, this block is good to go. They all follow the rules. And then they perform the proof of work function, which I'll get to in a second. And all the miners are racing to essentially add a new entry to the ledger. Okay, and they get paid for doing that work. And what's interesting about this process is it's actually a thermodynamic anchor. You're connecting this totally digital thing that is Bitcoin software. You're connecting it into the real world by an anchor or a tether to energy. And energy, due to the laws of thermodynamics, you can't cheat it, right?
Right.
And so all miners, they must spend energy in order to perform their proof of work function, perform their work for the network. And so what that does is it gives everyone in the network a very good assurance that no one's cheating and that there will always be 21 million Bitcoin and they always come out on time. And so that sort of thermodynamic guarantee is unique to proof of work. And that's actually one of the biggest things Satoshi solved. All the other parts of Bitcoin were solved prior to him pushing the pieces together, but he created this, the proof of work system as a time stamping service, which is sort of building on Adam Back's proof of work as like a anti-spam for email. Okay, and now I got to go into a philosophical point if I haven't already, which is my favorite place to play in Bitcoin. I'm going to draw on Gigi's work. He wrote an essay called "Bitcoin is Time," which is sort of an evolution of an early article called "Bitcoin is a Decentralized Clock." And both of these essays are getting to the fundamental point of what proof of work solves, which is that this is a distributed network. So there are nodes all around the world, and these nodes have to try to figure out a way to keep time, right? What if my time in Minnesota, your time in New Jersey, and someone else's in Bangkok are out of sync, right? That's actually really hard to do today in distributed systems due to the speed of light, due to how computers operate. And so what Bitcoin does is 10-minute time or 10 minutes per block. That's each like tick. That's like each fundamental unit of Bitcoin's clock. Okay. And that proof of work essentially synchronizes the whole globe and prevents any issues with the speed of light and issues that computers have synchronizing time. And so that's really what's happening. And I think, well, that's probably enough for a 101, but there's some really interesting things with how Bitcoin plays into the energy markets. But I'll shut up for a second and let you steer.
Also, correct me if I'm wrong. The process that you were talking about is how new Bitcoin is brought into circulation. Correct? Each time a new block is minted, right? And each block size is what, 8 bytes or 8 megabytes.
It's about up to 4 megabytes. Up to 4.
That was what the debate was. The wars were over right back before.
Yeah. It used to be 2, and then the SegWit update essentially made it up to almost 4, a little less than 4. And yeah, you're totally right, and I missed that aspect, which actually is a good learning lesson. So if you're really deep into Bitcoin, it's actually hard sometimes to teach the absolute fundamentals.
Yes.
And I totally just made an example of myself there with that. But yes, the other thing that new blocks do is the miners get paid in transaction fees for doing the work, and they get paid in a block subsidy, which is the protocol itself issuing new units, minting new units out of thin air, and they go to the miners. And yes, in every 4 years, that new miner subsidy gets cut in half, right? And so in the beginning, 50 new Bitcoins every 10 minutes, then it went to 25, 12.5. Now we're at 6.25. That'll continue going down for the next like 170 years.
Right.
110 years.
Until there is 21 million Bitcoin in circulation, and then that's it.
That's right.
Okay. Now that we established like how transactions are verified and how blocks are minted, and now we get into some of the fun stuff. A couple of weeks back, I read a tweet that you sent out that had said the most fascinating part, the most fascinating thing in Bitcoin right now is the mining industry. I reached out to you right away and wanted to pick your brain. What are you seeing? What are you looking at? And what is fascinating you?
Absolutely. So the first thing is, let me just lay one more foundational thing. As a Bitcoin miner, right, it's actually a very complicated business. But to keep it simple, there's kind of two elements. They have hardware, so they need to acquire these specialized computers called ASICs, and those computers are what process hashes, essentially trying to get paid for adding a new block. So they have special hardware. Some of this hardware is new, some of it's old, right? You can buy the new stuff that's really expensive, or you can buy the old machines that are really cheap, but they're not as efficient, right? So you kind of like pick your mix, and your energy is the other component. So you have to find an energy source of some sort, and everyone competes on the hardware, and everyone's sort of even on that playing field. Not exactly, but close enough. But energy is the interesting part, because you can scour the earth for energy no matter where you are. If you can plug in energy to these machines, you're automatically competing in the network. So the miners are going around looking for cheap energy. Okay, that's the key point. They want the cheapest energy. That's the only way that they can make this work. Okay. And so what we're often finding is that the cheapest energy is energy that would otherwise be wasted. Okay. Nick Carter calls this non-rival energy, which I think is a nice term. And to put that in context, humans, we waste about 2/3 of the energy that we produce. Okay. That sounds crazy. Why is that? Well, in our energy grids, we have to plan for the time of year where we need the most energy demand from our grid, right? So if you live in Texas, the time when they need the most energy would be maybe like mid-August when it's super hot. Okay, all the houses are drawing energy for AC. And so the grid has to plan for that day. However, on a normal day, they only use like 1/3 of the energy that they produce. Okay, so what do you do with that wasted energy? Well, they mostly just throw it away. They just shoot the electrons into the ground, literally completely wasted. So Bitcoin miners come in and they say, hey, I'll buy that energy from you for super cheap, and I'll turn that into money, Bitcoin. And then the energy utility says, hey, well, no one else is going to buy this. No one else could buy this. So sure, we'll sell it to you at a good deal, right? And so both parties win. Miners get cheap energy. Energy utilities get paid more for the energy that they produce. So that symbiosis is an incredible, incredible alliance. And I think that is the part where I was referencing the tweet where I'm saying, wow, this is the most interesting part of Bitcoin, because number one, almost nobody understands the energy markets. Normal people don't.
Right.
And myself included. And I've sort of like stretched myself, crash course, learn about this. And so forgive me if you're an expert and I get a few things wrong, but I'm trying to get as close as I can. And so, yeah, that symbiosis is the key. Let's unpack it a little bit. But first, why are Bitcoin miners so unique to the grid and to the energy utilities? One of the reasons is because they can co-locate. Okay, and what that means is Bitcoin miners can plug in their machines right next to where the energy is produced. Okay, why is that important? Well, it's really expensive to transport energy. If you move energy across long distances, you waste a lot of it just due to dissipation from heat and other reasons. And other times you have energy assets, which is common, let's say in West Texas, they're drilling oil in the western part of Texas, and they have a lot of wind there. However, there's no demand for energy in the west part of Texas. All the demand is on the east part of Texas. Okay, so they ship energy over there, but they can't ship it all. So there's little energy pockets around the world, little energy silos that are essentially trapped because there's no customers nearby and it's too expensive to ship that energy. So instead, the Bitcoin miners just literally drop a shipping container right next to where it's produced, and they instantly start buying. So that's co-location. Okay. The other unique thing that Bitcoin miners do is they offer flexible demand. And what that means is that let's say Bitcoin miners are attached to that grid, right? And it's a hot day in Texas, and all the houses are demanding the energy. Well, what would happen is the Bitcoin miners would just turn off their machines for the week or the day or the hour or the minute, and all energy would be shipped over to the end user, the customer, which would be considered a higher value user. Right. And all the miners, they work out this arrangement with the energy utilities to do that. And so essentially, Bitcoin miners are not stealing energy that would have otherwise gone to your house. Okay. That's a total myth. People say all the time. And so what that does for the energy miners now, or the energy utilities, is now they have a customer that's really, really unique and good, and that will make their economics better. They might choose to invest in an energy asset with a Bitcoin mining partner up front, because they'll see a faster return on their investment, which is quite nice. So that symbiosis is going to do all kinds of things. And if you look at it from a super high level, what does that offer? Okay, Bitcoin mining essentially says that no matter where you are in the world, if you produce energy, there's going to be a guaranteed buyer, the Bitcoin network. And so on a species level, it's actually an incentive for humans to become energy masters. It incentivizes us to research and to learn and figure out how to harness energy, because there's always going to be a buyer. And if we fast forward 100 years from now of that incentive, humans are going to figure out all kinds of crazy ways to harness energy. It's going to lead to like saltwater, desalination plants. We can turn salt water into fresh water, all kinds of crazy stuff we can't even imagine. And I think that's probably something that's not widely understood at this point. Back to you.
Right. So what you're telling me is Bitcoin's not boiling the ocean, right? Because if you listen to, the ESG, and which, by the way, the ESG, Bitcoin is great. The S and the G, I mean, it's perfect. And it's little known, but it's compliant with the E as well. So because, and to differentiate, just because it's a large energy consumption doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? The energy is properly utilized, right, and basically converting electricity into value, and then trickling into the world and improving lives. So the ESG thing debate, or the naysayers, really kind of they bother me a little bit too, because like it's they nitpick, right? Like they pick on Bitcoin, but look at the ESG on, like, what are the ESG on video games, or like your Christmas lights, or these frivolous things that add no value whatsoever. And for what Bitcoin brings to the table, brings to the world, I mean, it's definitely good energy spent, right? So the next,
can I piggyback off of that point quick?
Please.
I think that's a really, really important point, which is that you see all these critiques in the media, and they're essentially saying Bitcoin uses too much energy, it wastes energy, it uses as much energy as Argentina, boils the oceans, whatever, all these different things. And typically the people who make that claim, two things are usually true. One, they live in a Western privileged democracy with cheap energy, great banking services. And what that leads them to think about is, hey, what's the point of Bitcoin? I don't need Bitcoin. So there's obviously no value for this thing, right? So they assign a zero value amount to Bitcoin because it doesn't make sense to them. It doesn't fit their worldview. But what they miss here is that all around the world, about 2 billion people are living under dictatorships.
Right.
Roughly the same don't have bank accounts, and they live under double or triple digit inflation. Okay, so most of the world, or a large percentage of the world, has tremendous use case for Bitcoin. And if you look at the latest Chainalysis report, show the top 20 countries, and they look at percentage adoption of who owns Bitcoin. The US is in the top 20. Sure, everyone would expect that. But the reality is the highest penetration are in countries like Nigeria, Vietnam, Argentina, Venezuela, Kenya, Ethiopia. These are countries where they actually need it because their country has a shitty currency. And I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but that's true.
Okay. Yeah.
And so to that point, they assign no value to Bitcoin. So any energy use would be wasted, right? And they're obviously wrong, and they're coming from a place of privilege. And I'm glad that we're talking about it. Another point you mentioned is Christmas lights, right? There's a really important point here, which is that Bitcoin miners are transparent with their energy use. Right. It's pretty easy to get close when you calculate it. We don't know exactly, but we can get close enough. However, most other industries are really hard to calculate how much energy they use. How much energy does a bank use?
Right.
Try adding up all the armored cars and the offices and the data centers. It's really hard to add all that stuff up. But Bitcoin wears its energy budget on its sleeve, and so it kind of gives itself a target to go for. Okay. But yeah, your other point with regards to Christmas lights. Okay, if we're gonna play that game,
Right.
clothes dryers in the U.S. use more energy than Bitcoin network, right? And I don't hear the environmental people attacking each other for using clothes dryers. Why don't you just
Right.
use the sun or the wind? It's free.
Right. Yeah, totally free. So yeah, that's always a very, very strange argument, in my opinion, when I hear that one. Um, but what's fascinating too is, and I want to be touch on this, is it's I believe it's 57% is the number that I'm thinking, but I could be wrong and correct me. What percentage um, currently of the Bitcoin mining industry is renewable energy?
Yeah, it's a good question. The tricky thing is here, this is always changing. So the Bitcoin mining network, it is pure capitalism. It's just a competition. And so miners are moving around, chasing energy, turn it off here, turn it off there. And as things change in that ecosystem, the energy mix will change constantly. So, for example, about, I don't know, a couple of months ago, China had roughly half the hash power. So they had tons of miners there. And primarily because they had all this hydropower that was overbuilt and there was no customers. So essentially, the miners got really good deals from buying that essentially stranded or otherwise wasted energy. Then China banned Bitcoin and they kicked out almost all their miners. A few survived. And so then we saw this period where the global mining hash rate, which is how we measure how many people are mining, that crashed by like 50%. And then over the next 6 months, those miners moved around. They found new energy contracts in better jurisdictions. And now the hash power is back online, right? So it's constantly changing. I'm assuming the number you're referencing is from the Cambridge study, which is usually the group who does the best research on this. Nobody knows the exact number, but it's definitely over 50%. It's probably between on any given month 40 to 75% renewables. I think that's probably the range we can be really confident in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's roughly 3 times better, 3 times higher on renewables than, let's say, the US uses, right? And so Bitcoin mining is way more green than the United States or any
Right.
corporation or any other country. And so it's important to realize that it's actually quite green. And if you look at a total magnitude scale of all the energy the world produces, the Bitcoin network purchases about 0.1% of global energy production. So all this nonsense in the news is because of 0.1% energy use. Right? It comes back to the point that people don't understand Bitcoin and they don't assign it value. And so any energy use is bad. And of course, the media likes sensationalist headlines like Bitcoin uses more energy than Argentina. Well,
Right.
Bitcoin also provides property rights for 8 billion people when
Right.
especially important in countries where their governments don't do that for them.
That's
So
right.
if you're a humanitarian, you better support Bitcoin. Otherwise,
Right.
you're LARPing. If you support the
Right.
environment, you also better support Bitcoin. Otherwise, you're LARPing. And one example there is flared gas. This is exploding right now, and maybe you've heard of this, and maybe some of your listeners have or haven't. But essentially, when you drill for oil, you get some oil, great, but you also get natural gas. That's just a byproduct of drilling for oil. And natural gas is a great product. A lot of places heat their homes with it. It's very useful, but it's also very cheap. And so what that means is a lot of these oil wells, they actually can't afford to build a pipeline to ship that natural gas to its customers. They ship the oil because it's worth a lot, but not the gas. So what do you do with the gas? Currently, what they do is they just let it go in the air or they light it on fire. Literally just burn it. And they burn it because it combusts methane into CO2, water, and some other things. And so they're essentially just trying to make it as least bad as possible for the environment. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do that, okay, good job, whatever. Now what's actually happening is the Bitcoin miners are showing up on these oil drilling sites. And instead of letting the gases, the methane go to the air or burning it, they're actually converting it into electricity with a generator and they're mining Bitcoin on site. And so with the flared methane, they try to burn it all, but it's really only like 70 to 90% efficient. And so tons of methane is just going in the air. Methane's way worse for the greenhouse gases than CO2 is. And so Now, when you convert that into electricity with these generators, you're at like 99.99% efficiency. So you essentially let no methane escape. And instead, you convert into electricity, which then converts it into money. And so now all these
Yeah.
little things are popping up. And again, symbiosis with the oil producers. So now every unit of energy we extract out of the ground will now be profitable. And so we're actually being really efficient with our energy consumption. And we're also helping the environment with this process.
Right. And yeah, it's so profound, like especially to like while you were saying it, it's so profound to the ability to transform value out of electricity. I mean, it's just amazing. you know um how is solar gonna play into this, and can solar play into this?
Yeah, good question. So, trying to think of the simplest way to describe this. So, right now, solar it's a tricky energy source because it's only useful when the sun is shining. Okay?
Right.
So that means like, I don't know, 40% of the year you're generating power. If it's cloudy or not, if it's dark, you're not. And so solar is okay for like a supplemental form of energy, but you couldn't power a city on solar, right? There's no energy at night. And so it's best to think of same with wind. It's best to think of wind and solar as like supplemental or a little buffer, little bonus energy points. But generally speaking, they're a tiny percentage of our global market. And even if they become like free to produce, you can't run a society on these things. And so let's just get that myth out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
There are solar farms that mine with Bitcoin, and the arrangements are something like this. And we can use wind and solar interchangeably here. They're actually quite similar in how they interact with the grid. And so let's say West Texas, they've got wind, they've got solar, and they've got oil. Okay, it's all right there. It's like amazing place for generating energy. Their fossil fuels are like the base load. They're consistent energy 24/7. So that's essentially what powers Texas and most of the central South is fossil fuels. And then they have the wind and the solar, and those are great when they're working. But there are times when the grid produces way too much energy. Okay. And those times, what's nice is if they have an arrangement with Bitcoin miners, let's say it's midday, those instead of selling it to the grid, those solar farms or wind farms can sell it to the Bitcoin network at a much higher price. Okay, so when there's excess energy, when the grid won't pay much, they sell it to Bitcoin. But then if there's tons of demand from the grid, again, that hot day in August, they'll instead sell that energy to the grid because they'll get a better price. And all these little players create contracts to make sure that the end user gets the power that they need, right? Again, Bitcoin's not taking energy from an important use case like a hospital or something like that. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question. There's another really cool example in the Congo. If you want, I can explain that. It's probably my favorite example.
Please.
Okay. Virunga National Park is where it's essentially where the gorillas live, if you ever remember something from biology. But it's Africa's largest national park, located in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. And in this area, it's very, very poor. The people are very poor. However, there's very rich in natural resources. Okay, there's lots of hydro there, there's lots of mountains, there's lots of biodiversity, etc. And about 5 million people live nearby to this national park. And again, they're not very poor, there's very little energy. And so what they do is they chop down trees from the national park, turn it in and use it as biofuel, which essentially means they heat their house and they cook with trees that they chop down. And that causes problems. One, you're destroying the natural resource. Two, cooking inside with biofuels kills about 1.5 million people a year, mostly kids, and almost all in poverty-stricken regions because they don't have any better form to cook. So it's killing all these kids. And also the area is so poor that it's leading to a bunch of violence and, again, poaching and essentially just destroying the natural resources because they don't really have a choice. Okay. So then the national park created this private public partnership where they partner with the EU and they partner with some Bitcoin miners. And then they dammed up a few rivers in this national park, created hydropower. Okay. Then they dropped shipping containers full of Bitcoin miners nearby. And in the short term, the Bitcoin miners are going to buy all that power as they slowly build out the grid infrastructure to ship that power to the end users. Okay, so again, Bitcoin miners subsidize the energy asset, which otherwise may not have even been able to be produced. Now the whole region's going to have cheap, reliable power, and the Bitcoin miners bootstrap that. What's that going to do? Now they can cook with electricity instead of biofuels. Now there'll be jobs because there's more electricity, more energy, more industry. Everything's downstream of energy. And then you will also, not cook with biofuels, so no deaths. What else? So it's an economic thing. It saves the biodiversity, and it's just an amazing humanitarian effort, only possible with Bitcoin. And I sort of view this as a citadel seed, right? These little Bitcoin energy things, they partner, you plant a little seed, 30 years, 50 years later, you have a thriving community because energy is fundamental to our existence. If you look at throughout history, humans and energy are tightly correlated. What do developing countries lack? Energy. So what does that mean? They can't manufacture anything, so they have to import everything. That's expensive. Energy is important for agriculture, so they don't have very much food. Energy is important to heat your house or keep you cool. We have all these climate-related deaths in developing countries. Again, energy solves all these problems, but energy investments are expensive. It's hard to find investors to spend the capital up front to build an energy asset that may or may not pay the people back in 10 or 20 years. But with Bitcoin miners, instead of a 10-year ROI, maybe it's a 3 or 5-year ROI, which will then incentivize more people to generate energy. And so again, the symbiosis, it just changes the incentives of the whole market, and the downstream effects are human flourishing. It's going to be the most important thing our species does with regards to human rights or human flourishing, in my opinion, in the next maybe 50 years.
Wow, yeah. Now, do you expect the cost, or do you expect with as innovation and more technology comes, that the cost of energy to decrease over time? And what kind of what kind of impact would that have while the price of Bitcoin is appreciating? Just to get your thoughts. I don't know what your take is on like UBI or anything like that, which is like universal basic income. I don't know. I keep hearing people talk about that. And I guess it's something that needs to be discussed and possibly, implemented at some point. But is this something that can contribute to that, do you think? With those two components, with the lowering, with energy price going down, Bitcoin price going up, basically any device could pretty much mine Bitcoin, right? To some capacity, at least.
Totally. So first, like impacts on energy prices. That's a good question. So I predict two things. One, we're going to produce way more energy. If we fast forward 50 years, we're going to probably produce 1,000 times more energy than we do today. So we're going to produce way more. And that's going to allow us to do new things like turn salt water into fresh water, or go to outer space, or colonize Mars, or any other wacky thing. But it's also going to decrease the cost of energy, which is going to raise the floor of humanity. So instead, like right now we have developed countries, like where we live in the United States, we have a high quality of life, we have homes and heating and all this stuff we take for granted. And then like half the world lives under extreme poverty conditions, or like what we would consider not livable in the United States. And so if we 10, 100, or 1,000x the energy, that essentially raises the floor. So all the people in developing countries can have basic quality of life stuff covered. Food, water, energy, education, all that stuff's covered with more energy. And so I think that would be crucial. With regards to UBI, in some ways, that is kind of like a global UBI, right? Empowering people with cheap energy, that sort of does what we want UBI to do. It will provide food, shelter, and transportation, jobs, all that stuff comes from energy. But we're like a little bit more practically, what do I think about UBI? This is kind of a broad, big question that's extremely relevant right now, which is that we're at the end of a credit cycle. And what that means is roughly 80 to 90 years, the government has their interest rate. So the government controls the money through the Federal Reserve. They manipulate the
Yes.
money. And, one of their main levers is to raise and lower interest rates. And so if they want to stimulate the economy, they make the interest rates lower, which essentially makes money cheap. It essentially floods the market with money. So everybody's investing and buying stuff. If they raise interest rates, it makes it more expensive to borrow. It makes it more expensive to invest. So that's sort of like, they call it tightening, but it would, kind of tighten the growth or slow the growth of the economy.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at a point where the interest rates are at zero. And so the central banks they can't go really any lower. And so that's a pretty scary point for an economy. You can tell inflation is going crazy. Central bankers are passing all these crazy new laws. They're trying to spy on your transactions. They're talking about unrealized capital gains, right? All this stuff is essentially a response to the fact that our economy needs to be reset. And how do we do that? I don't know exactly. I think Bitcoin is sort of like a life raft. It's a way to get off the sinking ship. But with UBI especially, I think it's going to be an inevitable part of this decade. During COVID, they started it, right, with the stimulus checks in the US, direct to individuals. That's UBI there. They're doing something right now with tax credits for people with kids. Again, those are direct to pleb UBI. And I think that it's going to be required for the government to do that because we're going to just go through this crazy period. And if they don't directly invest in the people, there's going to be cities burning because the bottom half of the economy is not going to be able to afford food and energy. And so I think UBI I think from like an economic theory standpoint, it's ultimately a bad idea. But from let's be practical and look at the situation we're in, I think it's actually a good thing to do. And I think it minimizes damage. It's the best bad decision or the best worst decision we can make right now.
Right.
And so I'm in support. Now, the Bitcoin community might also say that UBI leads to more inflation, which is absolutely true.
Mm-hmm.
And more inflation makes Bitcoin's value prop go up. And so there's some sect of the Bitcoin community who supports UBI and they support Fed intervention and Fed printing money simply as sort of an accelerationist position, meaning the more they print, the quicker this whole thing burns down and we can rebuild with Bitcoin. So that's kind of a funny position.
Yeah. Yes. So Jack Dorsey recently talked about hyperinflation possibly. He said it's happening. He got some pushback. I don't know why. A lot of people view him as the CEO of Twitter, but he's also the CEO of Square. And Square has, I think I watched Anthony Pompliano. He pointed that out, that Jack Dorsey's sitting on probably the most accurate data sets that you could be sitting on to make a call like that. I'm just wondering what your take is on that. And also Square is trying to do something along the lines of making mining or lowering the barrier of entry to mining or making mining like universal in some way. I don't know if you have insights on exactly what they're trying to do with mining. But if you could talk about that, that would be great.
Yeah, good question. And I think Jack's comment is interesting for many, many different ways. So like you mentioned, yes, he's part of Square and Twitter and much more Square if you look at what he owns and where he has influence. Right. But with regards to inflation, a couple of points. One, he said the I word, okay, inflation. And what happened? The internet went nuts. All the central planner types, all the coastal elites, all the fiat people, the professors, the Keynesian economists, all the people that are sort of ideologically opposite to Bitcoin, they all lost their mind. And why do they do that? Well, number one, they consider inflation to be not happening because they blindly trust CPI. And they're like, 4 or 5%, no big deal, right? We can unpack why that's not true. There's also some dogma in Keynesian economics. So think our central planners today, the Fed, et cetera. They believe that if you think if the population thinks inflation's coming, then that guarantees inflation, right? So our perception of it actually creates, the future reality. And I think
Right.
there's some truth to that. And whether there is or isn't, that's how they operate. And so when the Fed does these fancy speeches and they like tell us what they think they're going to do and raise or lower interest rates, they're really careful with their words, because what they're trying to do is give like a hidden message inside a message, and they're just trying to manage perceptions. It doesn't really matter what the interest rates are. It matters what our perception of the interest rates are. And so that's why the establishment lost their mind when Jack Dorsey said the quiet part out loud, because you're supposed to never say that word, because then you guarantee inflation. So that's kind of an interesting point. With regards to do we or do we not have inflation, this is such a quagmire of a topic. And again, dogma rules today, where most people think CPI and whatever our overlords hand us is correct. But CPI is a politically rigged metric, right? It's a tool used to back into the number that they want, and it doesn't actually tell the whole picture. So I'll give a simple example. CPI is 5%, 5.4, whatever. They just printed that number. That's pretty high, but it's not anywhere near a hyperinflationary event, right? 5%. However, does that tell the whole story? Okay, what if you wanted to buy real estate in the last year? Did real estate go up 5%? No, it went up like 25%. What if you want to buy stocks in the last year? Well, they're up 50%, not 5%. What if you want to buy Bitcoin? Bitcoin's up 350%. You want to buy food? Ribeye up 30%, right? And so
lumber,
lumber up and back down now. The supply chain shortage is part of this. And so the reality is inflation is much more complicated. You have to look at individual use cases. Yes, okay, TVs are getting cheaper every year. That's a power of technology. And so, like, if we look at the grand macro scale, technology and globalization, those two forces, they're downward pressure on prices, right? Technology does everything faster and cheaper. Globalization allows us to find the cheapest labor around the world, which again leads to cheaper goods. So the global state of our techno-global world is everything should be getting cheaper every day. Yet things are going, they say they want to target 2% inflation, okay? If they didn't print any money, it would be more like 10% deflation. Things would be getting cheaper every year. But instead, they're printing money like crazy people. Actually, more money was printed after 2008 than the previous like 90 years combined. Wow. Think about that. So we're on a print speed, and it has to accelerate now. We're like a drug addict who needs another hit before they feel the withdrawal. And right before the withdrawal, they need a bigger load each time to maintain the same high until we go on life support here. But all that to say, don't listen to CPI numbers. Trust yourself. What are you trying to buy? The shit we're trying to buy is going up. That's the reality.
That's right. And just and my last question, and then we wrap it up was if you could just what exactly is Square doing with mining? A couple of weeks ago, I read it a little bit, but I really couldn't make out what they were trying to do. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Is that going to make it easier for just everyday people to possibly be involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. And to be honest, I don't know the details, so I couldn't give you a good answer on that, but I'll try to give context and get to the heart of your question. What Jack's doing, and I think we can believe him here. Jack says he's on the mission for Bitcoin. At the Bitcoin conference in Miami in June this year, he said, "I'll quit Twitter and I'll quit Square if Bitcoin needs me." Right. And people were skeptical, right? Because he's a CEO and Twitter censors people. Can you trust this guy? Right. That's what he said. Now let's look at what he did. Okay. Well, Square put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. That's pretty good. Twitter integrated Bitcoin Lightning into their tipping service. Wow. Pretty cool. Awesome. What else did he do? Jack's building open source hardware wallets because he believes that it's important that we have self custody. Amazing. Now he's talking about getting into mining. Amazing. Jack hired a team to displace Twitter. He literally is trying to outcompete himself and to disrupt himself, and by creating a open source social media protocol rather than a centralized company version. So think like a decentralized protocol for messaging, and then Twitter would be one front end, and then you could create a different front end, and there could be hundreds of different front ends, but the protocol itself can't be stopped. And so from my perspective, Jack is a hardcore Bitcoiner. He sees how important this is, and I think he's going to use Square and Twitter to be the leverage points upon which he can bring the most value to the Bitcoin community. And so I have nothing but respect for the man. I appreciate it a lot. And it sends a strong message, right? Jack Dorsey is a stud, and he deserves his accolades. And now his next stage in life appears to be about making Bitcoin a success. And I think he's a good person. And if he's not a good person, he does a really good job of convincing us that he is. And his actions demonstrate the fact that he wants to improve the world, and he thinks Bitcoin's the right way to do it. So nothing but love for the man.
100% agree. That's all I got. Do you anything you want to talk about, or anything you want to plug, or anything before we sign off?
Yeah, let's see. Well, if you want to get started at Swan, I got to do the self shill for our company.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to swanbitcoin.com/Quinttem, Quittem, my last name, /Quinttem, and you sign up for an account, you'll get $10 in free Bitcoin. No purchase necessary. Obviously, I would love for you to use our service, but you can just create an account and get $10 in Bitcoin for free. So come, please do that. Test out our platform. Send me any questions you have or any feedback. That'd be amazing. And then the next thing I would plug is all my writings on brandonquittem.com. And I tweet all the time. So bquittem, come say hello on Twitter. But I'm most well known in the Bitcoin space for writing a series of essays called The Mycelium of Money, which maybe we do a part 2 on this sometime. But it's exploring Bitcoin through the lens of a living organism, specifically fungi. And we're not going to get into it this time, but if you're at all interested in biology, mycology, psychedelics, fungi, or just like trying to understand Bitcoin from a new angle, I encourage you to give this one a look. My pinned tweet is actually part 1 of that series.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I would love to explore, that topic with you, one day soon, if you're up for it. That's all I got though. But thank you so much for viewing. Please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more content like this. This is not financial advice, so be sure to do all your own research and drop a comment, because your feedback is important to me. Thank you so much for watching.
All right, buy Bitcoin. This is financial advice.